Hi, my name is Mike Dillard, and this is Self-Made Man, the podcast for men who want to leave their mark on the world and create a legacy of honor, integrity, and achievement in every aspect of their lives. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it is time to forge your destiny. So today's show is definitely one of my all-time favorite episodes here at Self-Made Man. I have to say, when I first heard about Scott and his business, my expectations were not that high because, frankly, they're in a product category that most men don't really care about. But then Scott began to tell his story and the story of how he and his wife were inspired to jump into a completely new industry where they had zero experience and create a product line and a brand that would completely change that category for the better. So in his story, you're going to find a formula, and I'm convinced that this formula can be applied to any product in any industry and allow you to instantly carve out an incredibly successful piece of that pie. And at the heart of that formula is people and the commitment to create a company that benefits every single person involved, from the farmer in India and their family members on the production floor to the customers making the purchase and everyone in between. So if you have an idea for a business that you want to start in a new industry, and if you want to take on the biggest companies in the world like P&G, Nestle, or Coke, or Nike, you are going to learn how to do that here today in an interview that only gets more and more valuable as it goes on. So please help me welcome Scott Tannen. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Today, we are going to have a really, really interesting interview with an entrepreneur and a founder of a company called Boll and Branch. And what's really interesting about this is I've learned more about our guest Scott and his company, is that I don't know if I could think of a topic that off the cuff would be of less interest to men, and Scott, chime in here in just a second, than sheets and bedding. But with that being said, the story behind Scott and the company that he and his wife have founded from an entrepreneur's perspective is absolutely fascinating, and it's going to contain some incredibly valuable lessons that you can apply to your life, your philosophy, and your business as well. So with that being said, Scott, welcome to Self-Made Man. Really glad that you're here.
Thanks so much, Mike. Really glad to be here.
So, you know, we talk about this on a weekly basis, sheets, bedding, and linens here on the show. But
of course, who doesn't?
Right. But what you guys have managed to build, I think, is absolutely fascinating. And I know there's going to be a hell of a story here, you know, once again, considering that you came from a very different industry with a very different background. And I would love it if we could actually start there and get maybe 5 to 10 minutes of your history when it comes to business and entrepreneurship, and eventually take us down to the path where you and your better half, if you will, decided to start Boll and Branch.
Sure. Yeah, much better half. And I'll make sure she hears this back at some point so that I can confirm I said that. But you know, it's interesting. I don't spend a lot of time, you know, talking or thinking about my background and where I've come from, because it's just sort of my story, right? And everybody has their story. But you know, I think I've always felt like an entrepreneur. Although if you were to look at my resume and history, it might not appear that way. So I went to Vanderbilt University in Nashville, where I witnessed some of the worst football I've ever seen, and continue to this day. But I met my wife there. And upon graduating, I took a job in the HR department of Nabisco. And my job was to feed resumes through a scanner all day, every day. And I just thought this was great. And I thought maybe I'd be able to save up enough money for a briefcase and get to wear a suit and do everything that I thought a proper business person was supposed to do, especially coming out of college. Within about 48 hours of feeding resumes through a scanner and getting lots of paper cuts, I think I realized that it wasn't for me. But this sort of thing happened while I was in college of the internet popping up, and I was able to successfully utilize it so that I really didn't ever have to go to the library, and I could figure out a way to do all the research I needed for my papers and everything online. You know, in the late 90s, it was still considered such bleeding edge to use Yahoo and whatnot. Sadly, I didn't invest in Google when I first started realizing it was fairly efficient. So, you know, here I am in 1999 in the HR department of Nabisco saying, so my job all day is to take resumes, open up the envelopes, get a paper cut then, take the resume out, get a paper cut then, feed it through a scanner, hope it actually scans correctly, and then put it into to a database, which was basically unsearchable. And I started realizing that, well, this internet thing could probably help. So why don't I buy a book? And here I am at a Fortune 100 company buying a book as a 21-year-old kid on how you build a website. And I did a project, and it was really at night in my spare time, because I hated my job so much that I was like, if I could just get people to email their resumes, wouldn't that be a great idea? And it seems so ridiculous to think about this at the time. Cutting to the chase, I put together an entire careers website, had a great chance to work with some of the guys that started Hot Jobs early in their years, and I built the entire thing, and I was able to get a meeting with the head of HR for the whole company, and I presented it, and it really looked great. It functioned really well, had a great technical back end, and she said, "Wow, this is incredible, and we're going to roll this out, but unfortunately, we don't need you anymore."
Yeah, you're fired.
You're fired. But she kind of this is probably about 4 months into my career, I'm rolling this thing out, and it suddenly, obviously, it's the law of simultaneous invention. There are other people at other companies and people at places like Hot Jobs doing this all the time. But I kind of was able to take that notion. I said, I'd love to figure out how I can use the internet, which is what we called it at the time. Although the CEO of the company called it the Netscape, which was kind of ridiculous. But I was like, we got to figure out a way to use this to sell cookies and crackers and candy and dog biscuits and all the different products we make. And to make a long story short, I became the de facto, kind of man on the moon that places his flag. I became the de facto digital marketing department for Nabisco at about 22 years old. So one of the notions we had, again, you're 22 years old and you don't have much of a sense of politics and things like that. But sitting in front of a marketing team of people with MBAs from all kinds of incredible schools and brilliant people, and saying, I know you guys have poured your lives into creating these brands, but nobody really cares about them, especially online. So you're not just going to build a bunch of websites that people want to come and engage with your brand on. You have to give them a reason to come by. So we know we're selling candy to kids and things like that. So let's create games. Let's create a gaming portal and brand those games and give it to the kids for free. And that notion, there was a website that had started called Candy Stand, but it wasn't really a pure play gaming site. And we took a brave step in 2000, 2001 to really pivot this marketing property. And within Nabisco, which became Kraft Foods at the time, Candy Stand became one of the top 1 or 2 online gaming destinations online anywhere in the world. And it was very successful at bringing in 20, 30 million unique users a month to play from, up to a couple hundred games. So if you're playing baseball, it's a home run derby game. The signage might be for Bubblicious, or it might be for Lifesavers or a brand like that. So what I found is that, in the very early days of online marketing, we were approaching things a little bit differently than sort of the standard, go hire a really expensive ad agency and pay them an awful lot of money to build a marketing campaign. Fast forward my career, I left Kraft in 2005 and I went to Wrigley. I'm in a similar role, heading up digital marketing globally for the business. They had acquired Candy Stand along with brands like Altoids and that I really enjoyed working on. And in 2007, Wrigley decided that the Candy Stand property was getting so much traffic that it was actually contributing, negatively financially to the business. It was, when you're paying $10-12 million a year to host a website and your objective is to sell chewing gum, became a challenge. So to make a long story short, Candy Stand was something that they decided to divest. And some of the investors that had approached them, because this, while there was no monetization, it was a highly valuable property. And they approached me to come on board. And over time, actually kind of a management buyout of that company and started a business called Funtank. So Funtank was my first startup. We launched in 2007, and Candy Stand was a key asset, not our only asset. We were kind of early movers in mobile gaming and social gaming and all of those great things. What I learned very quickly looking after Candy Stand was number one, how competitive customer acquisition was, and number two, how important data was at understanding how to monetize people online and traffic. So in the course of 2.5 years, Funtank as a business really exploded. Candy Stand and online gaming sort of died a little bit, but There were other monetization options that, as everybody knows, for more famous companies like Zynga and whatnot, the monetization of social gaming and virtual goods and things like that really kind of bubbled up. So we sold the business in 2010, and I stayed on for a year and a half, sold the company to Publishers Clearinghouse and at PCH, which is, again, a business that everybody's aware of, and people probably aren't aware of strategically how smart they are in terms of understanding customer acquisition, user modeling, and behavior. And what they're doing is, they're playing arbitrage, and that's the same thing. That the game of arbitrage is what exists in social gaming as well, where you're creating a baseline of metrics and understanding, well, my value per paying customer is X, and so I need to pay X minus X number of cents to acquire a customer, and then continue to scale that activity. The difference that I saw after I left is that you're taking penny profits when you're selling mobile games or you're selling social virtual currency and things like that. You're taking penny profits and trying to scale that into millions of dollars. And I was very intrigued at the time by e-commerce. It was something that I really hadn't done. I felt that through working in more classic marketing organizations, I was very fortunate to be a part of teams that had done great things with brands like Oreo or Altoids or Planters Nuts, and sort of building and cultivating and curating mass market brands that had deep meaning to the customers. And you change the color of a fill on an Oreo and you get 10,000 emails the next day. And you realize that these are things that actually mean something to somebody. And that my background shaped my belief in brand, and we can talk more about that later. But ultimately, I believe that a brand is something that invokes love and emotion from the consumer. If a brand disappears, consumers are sad, they mourn, they're angry. If a product disappears, the consumer just finds something else. So I felt that I had an opportunity to look at physical goods and e-commerce as something that might give me more potential total dollars in allowable cost to acquire customers. And number two, if I could find a segment or a space that was relatively devoid of brands. And again, there aren't a whole lot of brands in the world. There's a lot of products, and there's a lot of companies that call themselves brands, but they're not, because there's no emotion. I felt that I wasn't sure if we were going to sell a lug nut or a jet airplane engine or a bottle of water. I felt that I might have a competitive advantage. And the honest story is, so here I'm, and on the personal side, I left Publishers Clearinghouse after a year and a half. Still have a great relationship. Really, really respect those guys. Which I don't think you find a lot of people that sell their company and feel that way about the people that bought it from them. And unfortunately, my mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and they were wonderful about allowing me the time I needed to be with her. And as sad a thing as that is to happen as anybody that's experienced it, when you're gifted the opportunity by selling your company to be able to, support yourself such that you can invest the time in family, I consider that, in a dark cloud, just an incredible blessing. But everybody thinks differently when it comes to Act Two, and so not only was I thinking about how I could do it differently economically, but I was also thinking a little bit about how do I leave the world a better place? How do I have Act Two not just be about me and my family and my economic? So I kind of had all these thoughts scrambling around my head, and honest to goodness, my wife and I are redoing our master bedroom, and she came home one day and as anybody that's done a home construction project, it's truly death by about 1 million micro decisions. How many, inches from the trim you should put a light switch or whatever it happens to be. And she came home and she looks me in the eye and she goes, "Scott, I cannot figure out what bed sheets to buy." And I looked at her in the eye and I go, "Honey, I love you, but
Right.
That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Give me 15 minutes and Google, and I will buy some bed sheets." And I went online, and then the first thing I thought was, all right, let me find the highest thread count things, and you type in what's the best bed sheets. And you end up, if you're a semi-knowledgeable consumer with any intellectual curiosity, you realize really quickly that bedding and bedding in general is a category that absolutely everybody participates in, yet very few people know anything about. And when you try to look for truth and look for answers, you don't find it, or you certainly don't find it very easily. I'm notorious for falling into rabbit holes, and learning about bedding didn't actually start out as me saying, I want to create a bedding brand. It actually started as me saying, this is ridiculous. How can I not figure this out? I feel like I'm a semi-intelligent person, despite what maybe my high school teachers would say. And that's where the story of Boll and Branch began. It was I dug deeper and deeper and found that you weren't hearing any one consistent response about what makes the best bedding and why from any one person. So that was the beginning.
So I would love to go through this whole evolutionary process, on how you built the brand, essentially, because that I think is a really fascinating topic that I am in the process of studying and learning more about, because have a similar background to you, just kind of self-taught when it comes to digital marketing and things like that. But building a brand can be a fairly intangible thing that I have noticed is typically ignored in the digital space because everybody's simply, concerned about conversion rates, and what's your ROI and your ad spend. And so I would love to start there. How did you guys come up with the name and the logo and the mission behind that will ultimately, become the brand that it is now?
Yeah, and no pun intended at all, but it was completely organic. And I think that's probably brands form naturally, right? There are a lot of very expensive agencies that you can go out to and have them create a logo and create a color scheme and a palette and develop all this copy and say, we have created in a bottle your brand. And for that, we're going to take 6% of your company and you've paid us $200,000 and trust us, it is brilliant. And they're going to show you like your font and what the spacing on the B means emotionally to the customer. And I'll tell you, it is a bunch of baloney. Because at the end of the day, what makes a brand is what it means to two constituencies of people, the people that created the brand and the people that are consuming the brand. So when I think about we'll use, an example like Nike. Nike has brilliant brand marks. They are incredibly consistent. They, from the time Michael Jordan came in and saved that business to today, when you see that swoosh, it immediately means something to you as a consumer. It says everything from cool to athletic to sharp, smart, etc. But if you go all the way back in time and you think about the culture of Nike as a company, those values, those things have not changed since the very day that Phil Knight and Prefontaine got together and sort of created this concept, because it was based on not only a void they saw in the market, but more importantly, it was something that deeply meant something to them. Even the name of the company, the Goddess of Victory, means something to them as a business. And I think that when you see, even now as a multi-billion-dollar company, you can still see the texture in every single communication that they put out there of the deep meaning behind the brand. And you can't fake that, and you can't buy that, and it can't come out of a bottle. So I always suggest to people that when you're thinking about, when you have your product idea, you then have to talk about, well, what does it mean? Why does it matter? Why do you need to be there? And some of the answers to that can be, well, there's a great revenue opportunity. And in that, you can have a very successful revenue opportunity and a very financially successful business. That doesn't mean you're a brand. And that doesn't mean you need to create a brand, right? If I'm going out and making, a new widget because I think that there's a void in the market for the widget, it doesn't mean that I can make people care about the widget, because I might not care about the widget, but I might see an opportunity and make hundreds of millions of dollars and be thrilled with my widget product business. But products can't masquerade as brands. Brands are something unto themselves.
So what defined Yale's brand?
Again, I'll be really honest with you. My starting point after I sort of fell into this rabbit hole was, gosh, the market we'll talk about bedding as a broad sense, right? Why do you buy bedding? You buy bedding because you got a new bed. You buy bedding because you moved, you got married, your old sheets ripped. It was an entirely, and still is, an entirely need-based category. And you go to these big box retailers, you walk in ahead of time, understanding how much you plan to spend on it, because you're equating how much I spend to the value of it. And that exists in pretty much every category. And then you're looking for the markers that exist in the industry. What's the highest thread count? What has Egyptian cotton? All these sort of, super, super kind of high level concepts that's at some point along the way you've picked up, and you walk into the store. Buying sheets historically is no different than buying a refrigerator or a dishwasher or a wrench. It is totally need based. You're walking in and it's purely your economics, the 30 seconds you plan to spend understanding the value of the economics you invest versus the markers that are out there. So you have an entire base of consumers that are totally uneducated about it. And I felt as a starting point, I was like, well, let's just educate the process. Let's just simplify it, make it really easy. And we're going to, I think that if you can break it down for the customer at a superficial level, the way, say, Warby Parker has done with glasses, you're cutting out the middleman, so to speak. I mean, everybody's sort of seen that movie, right? But that movie works, and you're offering the consumers better value, better quality, and more convenience by buying it online. So that was sort of my starting point. But, I planned from day one to self-fund this thing. And one of the reasons I prefer to start businesses by self-funding them is that it makes me, as a founder, much more invested in the concept, so that at the time I need to go and ask for money from somebody, I've made a lot of really, really specific, painstaking decisions, knowing that the money's coming out of my pocket, not someone else's. You could be a lot sloppier when you're spending someone else's money, but that's probably a separate conversation. So for me, as I'm spending my own money, it started really trying to understand, all right, where do these sheets come from? And you start learning things right off the bat, the easy ones that I think at this point everybody knows thread count means nothing. I think as a result of what everybody's seen with Target, that 90+% of the Egyptian cotton products in the marketplace aren't exactly that. And I figured all of that out really, really quickly. But it wasn't until I started, peeling back those layers, the onions a little bit more, that I started saying to myself, geez, the status quo in textiles is a disaster. It's a complete mess. And if I'm going to participate in this category, I'm going to use my own money and build a business. I have to build something that I'm proud of. And again, maybe it's a little bit of being Act 2 as an entrepreneur. Act 1, you're thinking a lot more about the economics. Act 2, you're saying, I've been very fortunate in my life. I've had a great outcome. So I want to be more sustainable in my thinking about the type of business I create. I want it to be something I'm proud of. I want it to be something my kids feel participatory in. And in doing that, I can't look away from things like child labor. I can't look away from the life expectancy of a cotton farmer in the developing world being 35 years old. All of those sort of norms in the category became, and still are, they're very upsetting to me. And I felt that at that point, I wasn't sure if I was writing a book, to be perfectly honest, or building a business. But I decided to learn everything I could about textiles and the production process and be unencumbered by sort of the status quo or the way things have always been done in the category. And the result, and I can, again, if you have a 9-hour show at some point, I'd be happy to give you the full story. But the result was we ended up building a supply chain that is absolutely and totally completely different than every other brand of bedding in the world. Startup or established company. We have built this from the ground up. And we oversee everything from the cotton seed until the product is delivered on the person's doorstep. And by doing that, we're selling something that we believe in at an extremely emotional level is the finest bedding products you can buy in the world. And that's something that plays itself out in that we're not buying products sort of out of a catalog or a big New York City showroom. We've engineered these products. We've engineered everything from the tension of the thread to the diameter of the yarn to the specific colors of the dye to the packaging to the way it's delivered, the way it feels, how it washes. Everything has been a highly intentional, choiceful decision. And it took us over a year to build the business plan and perfect the products. But we got to a point where we were able to focus group a product that was so different from everything else in the market that it was getting 10 out of 10 preferences and focus groups versus products that are 4 or 5 times the price.
So I'm really interested in that story, especially when you're coming from an industry that you have a completely different set of skill sets. You're going into a brand new world that you don't know anything about. You're going online, you're buying books on textiles for the first time. And I can relate to this. The audience already knows my version of this story, so I'm not going to get into it. But I've been in the process of doing the exact same thing for the last year. And, so were there flights to India to go figure this out in person and to explore all this? So what was that like?
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting. So the first place I started was, it's funny. I've even seen some other startups that are working now with some of the mills that I met with, and I felt like I needed to take a shower after the meeting because, they're well, I'll just leave it at that. But, but, that was my response was, I had a meeting in the city with this company it's a big manufacturer in Italy, and they make things for every department store you can imagine. And I'm like, all right, great. They're like, we use Egyptian cotton, and I was like, great. Well, where are the farms? They're like, oh, they're in Egypt. I'm like, all right, let's go. Can we get on a plane? Like, I want to see it. I want to experience it all. And they're like, well, we don't exactly know where they are. I'm like, well, what do you mean you don't know where they are? They're like, well, we don't actually finish the product here. We get the fabric here. So the fabric's made in China. I was like, okay, all right, let's call the factory in China that's making the fabric, and let's go figure out where their cotton is. They're like, they won't tell us that. I'm like, what do you mean they won't tell you that?
Who knows where it's from?
Right. So then I tracked down by reverse engineering their supply chain. I learned more about their supply chain than they knew. And it didn't take much. Again, having a background in technology and being able to use the internet as an example gives you a tremendous competitive advantage in a really kind of old category and established category like textiles. But I got in touch with the folks in China that were making their product and finally kind of beat them up enough on Skype and on the phone and found out that their Egyptian cotton, quote unquote, actually came from China. It wasn't from Egypt at all. And I remember talking to a few folks that had been in textiles, and I was outraged and shocked. And they're like, come on, you think any Egyptian cotton actually comes from Egypt? There's such a little amount of it that if it did, it would cost thousands of dollars at retail. And again, it was just like I don't actually believe that the establishment didn't want to tell me anything. They just didn't know. And nobody had ever asked them about it. So to answer your question, there was lots of traveling to sort of figure this out. But again, the absolute best tool I had was using the internet, working through organizations like Fair Trade USA, like GOTS, which is the Global Organic Textile Standards, the Textile Exchange, the Organic Trade Association. They're actually able to provide so much more of a roadmap. And when, in so many conversations with them, I'm like, I don't understand. Why doesn't anyone do this? They're like, nobody asks. Nobody looks. They just kind of take it at status quo. And so once we sort of rejected the status quo, I mean, I can tell you our bedding right now is made in a factory that was a garment factory, but they had the right standards, the skill set, the artisanship that we wanted. And we've helped them build their bedding capability. And that was, so we didn't take anything sort of at face value. We went out and built it and created it.
So, from the outside looking in, what you guys have done is essentially taking a commodity, a nameless, faceless commodity, and you've given it a face, and you've given it essentially a heart, and you've made the brand about the people who are making it and their story and, how your product has improved their lives. And that's one of the primary reasons why, individuals like myself would want to buy your product. So could you go into some of those stories and how you focused in on the people rather than just the product?
Absolutely. It's interesting. I placed our first order before we had a company name. I didn't even have a name. I had an LLC that, I, like everybody, you have 50 LLCs running around. So I was like putting the PO in through some goofy LLC I had. I didn't even have a company name. So I hadn't refined any of the marketing, the branding, the strategy or any of that. I just felt so compelled by the story. So let me give you an example and let me talk about the cotton trade because everything starts at the ground level. So when you think about conventional cotton is a commodity, right? So you can check that price in the commodity markets on a daily basis. And when you really look into it, you find that again, most of that cotton is coming from the developing world. So you first start trying to understand what life is like for those people, right? And I live my life by, my mother used to call it the golden rule. And I really try to instill that in my children and myself and everything that I really try to think about, even customer service. You just treat people like you'd want to be treated. And as you start learning more about textiles and learning more about the trade and building any kind of business, you realize that a business is based on people. And it's not just the people that are your head of marketing and your CFO, right? This business starts with cotton farmers, of which we have 10,000 of them now. We have thousands of factory workers that are making our products. So those people are incredibly valuable when we think about the end product we're creating. So when we started looking at conventional cotton, what you were finding is that you weren't ever able to trace that cotton back to people. It was always sort of middleman to middleman to middleman to middleman. And this is before the factory, right? So lots of companies have cut out the middleman between the factory and the consumer. But there are probably 5 times the number of middlemen between the factory and the crop when it comes to textiles. So I felt that one of the great competitive advantages we could have is cutting out those middlemen and the cost associated with it so that we could go all the way back to the source, find farmers, and then actually pay them properly, pay them fairly. If the commodity cost of cotton is below the living wage. So when you buy cotton, if you're a company and you're buying it at the commodity price, you are perpetuating a cycle of poverty. And that is not debatable. So as an entrepreneur and you start and you really think about textiles and you realize you're going to be participating in a global market, you do have an opportunity. And I think that's the beauty of entrepreneurship is that, when you're an entrepreneur, you're just trying to create the world as you see it should be. And that might be through creating a company or a service or a product or whatever it happens to be. So for us, we ended up finding small groups of farming cooperatives where we can work directly with them. We partner closely with Fair Trade. And Fair Trade works with, in our case, the Indian government. And they say, this is the price you're going to pay for cotton. And that price equals the living wage, not the minimum wage, not the commodity price. At the moment, we're between 2 and 3 times the commodity price what we're paying for our cotton.
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
For most companies, that's full stop, right? They're like, well, that's cost of goods, et cetera, et cetera. But if you can streamline the rest of your supply chain and suck out a lot of the waste, my cost of goods is probably at or below most of the brands that are pricing, are selling luxury products. That's why our competitive set is selling $600, $800, $900 for a set of sheets, and we're at a couple $100. It's because we've sucked out a lot of that waste. And we've done that by being conscious of the people, just by giving them, paying them a better wage. And by the way, we have a lot of social programs that we work on with them. For instance, a percentage of the money is earmarked for building shelters, schools, making sure they have clean water supplies, medication. Our belief, and Missy, my wife's background, she was a 3rd grade school teacher. She came along for me on this ride because she's also an artist and a designer. And she said, I wouldn't let you pick out our bedding, so I'm not letting you pick it out for anybody else's. So core to our beliefs as people is the power of education. And when you look at the people that have need in the world, the lack of education is what also perpetuates that cycle of poverty. So we're trying to raise the families that are responsible for growing our products out of the cycle of poverty, but we're also trying to help them build their communities so that their children can qualify for better jobs, can get higher paying jobs. And that's what changes the world. So it starts with people, and everything we do is about people. Yes, organic cotton is a million times better for the environment, but we believe in organic cotton because it's safer for the farmers. It's safer for their villages. Cotton's 2% of the world's crops, 25% of the world's synthetic pesticides and chemicals. And these are not American farms that have safety equipment and machinery. These are local people that have 2-3 acres and are spraying it by hand, and that's why their life expectancy is so low. And that all those chemicals are getting into the groundwater, into the water supply, and the kids are drinking and they're getting sick and they can't afford the medication. So when you think about the importance of organic, it's all about the people. It is night and day from a safety standpoint for these people. There's also the economic upside, but the safety, it was just conventional cotton is so bad in every way. It's not something I can be a part of. And I'm not a person that lives my life only drinking, organic wheatgrass for breakfast, right? Like I'm a normal person, but when faced with the choice of how I want to create the world, that was a non-issue. And for us, the people aspect of it goes all the way through the factories. We also are fair trade certified at the factories. We make sure that all of our workers are paid, again, not the minimum wage, which, believe it or not, is below the living wage. We pay the living wage. We also provide them with education stipends for their families, health insurance for them, their children, and their parents, because it's a joint living set up in a place like India. And we do these things because it's the right thing to do. You're not going to read about this in our packaging. You're not going to read about this, on our homepage. You can dig in and certainly read about it. But I think that we are authentically incredibly invested. I visit our factories in India. I brought my 12-year-old daughter with me to India last fall, and I know workers by name. I know their stories. I know about their children. I know the things that are going on in their lives. And that experience is so incredibly important to me and important to our company. And we consider all of these people a part of our company and a part of our team. And I think when we talk about authenticity of a brand, what I never intended or expected was that all of these aspects would come through and shine through more because of our soul as a brand and as a business than because of, we're not, you're not going to get an email from us that says buy a set of sheets and save a life. That's not, that might be the outcome, but it's not, that's not first and foremost how we market our product.
Well, that actually leads me to my next question. Transitioning from your vision around the product, at the end of the day, you've got to launch this thing and sell some bedding, to stay in business.
Sure.
What does that look like? And I think this is going to be really insightful given your previous background in marketing. If I'm thinking like, okay, I've got this great product, I've got this great brand, we've got a mission, and we're super passionate about it. At the end of the day, now I've got to figure out how to sell bedding. And so, what was that process like for you?
Scary. Scary. It's awfully scary when you're like, I've got $100,000 of my own money worth of bedding on a container halfway across the ocean, and I have no idea if anybody that's not related to me is going to buy this stuff. But from our standpoint, when it came to the product, we knew we made a product that exceeded anything else in the market at any price point we felt. So we felt really good about the fact that we had an exceptional product. And again, when it comes down to this, you can have the best intentions, the best social intent in the world. If you have a crummy product, it just doesn't matter. So we knew we had an exceptional product. One of the indications for us is that before we even told people what the company made, we started telling stories about workers and textiles and what was going on Facebook. And this is before Facebook really kind of cut out the virality that you could get for free. And we had 10,000 fans, which doesn't sound like a lot, but 10,000 people liked our page and were heavily engaged in, and we didn't spend a dime in advertising or marketing. And that was an indication to us that people actually cared. And as much as the establishment told us, nobody cares about the story, they just want to buy these sheets like a dishwasher. So that was an indication to us. But then it's about truly growth hacking. And you have to realize at the end of the day, when you start a company, you've got to hustle. And it is good old school American ingenuity and hustle. And you're working for every individual sale. So if you take a step back and again, let's say you're a venture-backed business and you've been venture-backed before you launched. You got somebody to invest in you because you gave them this big long-term financial plan. And which is obviously a load of garbage, because who the heck knows, right? So in our case, we realized we had to build this business one consumer and one sale at a time, and it was Missy and I. We had a bookkeeper, and that was it. And I answered every phone call, every email myself, and we were just working really hard. We found somebody that would comment on something on Twitter that seemed fairly aligned. We would just engage in conversation with them, not from a branded account, from our own account, and sort of introduce the product and brand to them that way. We were very fortunate that the press was interested in our story, and that gave us a nice little boost out of the gates. But again, then it was delivering all those customers an absolutely unparalleled experience, and that came through not just in our product but in our packaging. The phone call they got directly from me as soon as something was marked delivered, making sure everything was okay, emailing them a few days later. Nothing systematic, nothing like automated. It was completely growth hacking. I've never worked as hard as I have in my life than I did the first 4 to 6 months of Boll and Branch. But I also look back on that and say, people say, what was the tipping point? And I said, the tipping point was 1,000 little tipping points of just really exceeding expectations across the board and turning customers into your own advocate.
So, what started to transition you into more of a scalable business, and who was the first big hire that you made? And then from a sales perspective, is your approach, direct to consumer via digital? Are you trying to get into retail? What's your strategy look like?
Okay, that's a bunch of things. So I always like to say this, we didn't start day one and we weren't shipping things out of our garage, because I always planned and believed that this would be a very successful business. And you have to really believe that, right? And again, you can make up financials for a venture capitalist, but hopefully you really believe it. And so for us, I believed it, and I invested against making sure that we had an infrastructure that would scale and scale fast. We were very fortunate. The Wall Street Journal wrote a feature story on us 6 weeks in. We sold 100% of what we had in stock and had a 4-month waiting list for products. And by the time we filled all of those orders, we actually ended 2014, our first year, with about 1.7 million in sales and another 4-month waiting list on top of that. So we were at that point on our way. The first big hire I made was customer service, as you can imagine. But after that, it was in marketing and media and analytics. But customer service was clearly the most important addition we made to our team, because it at some point you can't scale yourself. So I had to think about, there are times when it's right to bring in people that have new capabilities and new experiences and a different perspective. But in the early days, it's most important that you carve out the things that you know best, that you're the best at, because you can manage it the best. So the first thing that I carved out was customer experience. The second thing I carved out was marketing and customer acquisition. Those were the two aspects of the business that I knew the best going in. So I was able to really help manage that and set these people up to be successful within the business and have it being truly additive. And I think that's maybe a little upside down versus what most people think.
Can you share some insight really on how you approach, digital marketing, given your background? Yeah. If you're going to hire someone from that position, what's their title? For me, it's interesting. I have this story in my head that if you really know what you're doing when it comes to online marketing, you're not hireable, because you would do it for yourself. And clearly that's a story that I need help working through. So I would love your insight on that.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to digital, I think that the way the world is today, I actually think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, but there are certainly aspects of it that people can bring in a lot of value additions. And I'm a huge believer. Everybody I've hired, I'm the dumbest person in this company. I have 20 people, and every single one of them is brilliant, and they're all better at what they do than I am. And they are, when I think about marketing, it's digital marketing is such a catch-all basket, right? So when I started my career, it was, you're the digital marketing team, and now it breaks into social, and it breaks into paid acquisition and organic SEO and so on and so forth. So I looked at it. The first part I looked at it was all right, let's bring in somebody that can really look after the analytics side of it, right? So somebody that's going to be able to carve out the time on a daily basis to dig deeper into the data, to look for pockets of inefficiency and look for pockets of efficiency, and help us to take what we're doing well and do it better, and stop doing the things that we're not doing well, because everybody's going to have waste within what they're doing. So I was able to find someone that was on the agency side, as an example, and she joined us to really dig in and look at many of the places that we're spending money. And when I look back all this time later, and I see the tremendous optimization impact that's had on our business, I actually, like, sometimes my jaw drops, right? And now she's one person out of like a 7-person marketing team. But let me take a step back and even talk about digital. I think when a brand starts, the most important aspect of digital marketing is email marketing. I hear entrepreneurs all the time say, I hate getting emails from brands. I don't want to do it. And I say to them, then just don't bother. Don't even bother starting, because email is tremendously, you have to be right with your cadence. You have to be right strategically. So we focused all of our efforts from a customer acquisition standpoint from day one, especially digital, with 2 potential outcomes. Outcome number 1 was a conversion to a sale, which was awesome. Conversion number 2 was capturing their email address. So we use Bounce Exchange. We use a number of different tools out there to assist us in capturing those email addresses. What we find is that the economics over a longer term period are really not all that different between the 2 capture mechanisms. But you have to be able to assign a value to it. You have to be able to look into it and dive into it. So, that's sort of step 1. And I think that step 1 for any brand that's launching online is build that email database, because you might not get the sale today, but you might get it tomorrow. And then from there, it's about segmenting and doing those sorts of things. But, you have to kind of just grab as many email addresses as you can. The other thing I realized is that scaling digital from a prospecting standpoint was way more difficult than I expected. I looked at huge brands in our category, whether it's, any department store you could think of or whatever. And I'm like, well, these guys are spending a ton of money. There have to be all these pockets of waste that I can sit in long tail keywords and build my business and arbitrage it up way, way, way harder and lost way more money on it than I anticipated. So for us, we really use digital not as much from a prospecting standpoint, but more from a retargeting standpoint. It's just much more efficient for us. And we'll use offline, mechanisms, PR, podcasts, things like that, to help drive people in the front door and then remarket to them using digital.
Yeah, that makes sense. Could you walk us through your infrastructure, if you will, of services? I always find that really, really valuable as far as which CRM, which cart.
Absolutely. So I call it our marketing stack, if you will. And I am notorious. There's only one person in the world that is probably more notorious than me for adding every single possible widget and software package and trying it out on their website. And that's Justin Winter, who founded Diamond Candles, super fascinating guy and a very good friend. But we launched the business. We were on Symphony Commerce, and the attraction there was that it was everything from our 3PL, and shipping to the customer all the way up through the shopping cart, kind of in one package, because I didn't feel that I wanted to invest in staffing to kind of run our own cart and do a lot of those activities in-house. So we were with them for a couple years, but have actually recently, as of May, moved to the Shopify Plus platform. And usually companies hit kind of 20, 30 million in revenue. And, the book says that's when you're going to go move to a Hybris or to a NetSuite or something like that. I am a huge believer in Shopify Plus as we are looking at the next generation shopping cart platform. And I think when it comes to shopping carts, even just over the 2-3 years we've looked at I've been deep in e-commerce, technology has become unbelievably commoditized.
Yeah, see, that's super valuable to me because we're in the process of looking for our next platform, and we're looking at Shopify, versus like a Magento, right? And so just to hear you say that, it's like, we're on the right track. So
yeah, and think about Shopify, right? Think about what it brings to the table. First of all, the cost is unbeatable. They bring relationships with payment providers that can certainly give you really, really competitive rates on that. But despite the fact that Shopify's liquid code is a little bit weird, they have an unbelievable network of developers. And because there's aspects of their platform that they very smartly don't let you develop on, it's very, very easy to make changes, to add new functionality, to build things out and do it in a capitally efficient way. And so you're talking to a guy that self-funded his business, and capital efficiency is, to me, one of the most important things that you can do. I know way too many people that have built Magento sites, and invariably 6 months later, you've A/B tested something, you want to make a change, and you're realizing, well, that's going to cost me $50,000. And you start getting into ROI. You're really looking at ROI to change something that seems painfully obvious to change on your website. So a huge fan of Shopify. From an email standpoint, we use Bronto. Bronto's been great. We also have used Klaviyo, and we love them. Both offer great opportunities for segmentation, conversion series, very, very good at helping to mine through a lot of customer data and understanding how to send smartly and deliver to people at the right time, when they're ready to receive it and so on and so forth. I'm also a very big Optimizely fan. And, I believe that you should A, B, C, D test everything. A lot of people go in and say, we're going to do a site redesign. If I was an investor and I heard one of my portfolio companies say, I'm going to do a site redesign, I'd probably try to get my money back because it's an archaic way of looking at things. Site redesign should be the outcome of hundreds and hundreds of A/B tests, and you should be constantly A/B testing everything. If somebody in your shipping department has an idea and you can very quickly on Optimizely A/B test it and prove if it works or not before you start investing development dollars in it, it makes you so much smarter. So we've now, over the course of 6-8 months, end up with a fully redesigned website. The last few pieces are officially rolling out, but everything's been A/B tested. We know exactly what's going to happen after we roll it out. So if I know, all right, it's $10,000 of development to do it, but I actually predict over 4 months it's going to generate me $75,000, pretty easy to make those decisions and, again, be very capitally efficient. I've mentioned Bounce Exchange, which is great. They're not the only game in town, but great from an email capture standpoint and cart recovery. I could go all day. I'll tell you.
It's great. I could geek out on this stuff for hours. So
I'll tell you one tool that I've just discovered, which I love, is a tool called FOMO, FOMO. They have a Shopify app. And again, one of my favorite things about Shopify is these apps make it so easy to plug in. What FOMO does is it pings the server. So if you're on bowlandbranch.com and you're surfing around, you're going to suddenly see that, Mike in Austin, Texas just bought a brown cable knit throw. And, it's kind of the concept, right? If you're walking down the street and you look at a retail store or you look at a restaurant and there's nobody in it, it feels one way. And suddenly you realize that when you're in a shopping experience that, wow, a lot of people are actually buying and converting, and it's all real data. None of it is made up. It's all real time. And, we've seen one of the most significant bumps in conversion rates that we've seen of any tool. We're only about 2-3 weeks into using it, but it's been tremendous.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's a technique I remember using 10 years ago,
right.
know, and it's interesting how things come back like that. But man, I've enjoyed this so much, and I wish we could just keep going, but I want to be respectful of your time. Just on the building side and the marketing side, and it's really refreshing to have a business owner, an entrepreneur who can come on and talk about the details. And I've always said that success is in the details. And that's really where, the decisions can be made and the actions can be taken and the lessons learned. And this has just been absolutely awesome. Any last words of wisdom in the remaining minutes that we have?
I think especially knowing your audience and that they're entrepreneurs. I mean, I'm such a believer in getting out there and doing it. And I think that it took me so long to take the leap the first time. And I don't try to live my life with any regrets or anything like that. But I would say that you spend your life building skills, building experiences, learning what you're good at. And one of the things that I think makes a true entrepreneur is they're very in tune with what they're good at and what they're not good at. And they're honest with themselves. And if you can take that perspective and chase your dream and start it, there's nothing better. And the best part is when you add people to your team, you add people to your organization, you find customers, and people believe and feel the same things you do and feel as passionate about your dream and your idea. I can't imagine anything that is a better feeling and better experience. And you have to have a short memory. You're going to make a ton of mistakes. But if you're ready to outwork someone, out hustle somebody, and you've got a great idea and you've got true, honest passion for it. And I don't think we all want to make money. Everybody's in business to make money. Otherwise we'd all sit on a beach or just play with our pets or our kids all day. But if what motivates you is beyond economics, and you have real passion, you'll never regret the day you struck out and just did it.
That's awesome. Absolutely true. And I just realized that I had one more little fun question that I meant to ask you today. Reading through your bio and knowing your history in the gaming world and industry, I read somewhere that you're still occasionally, firing up the PS4 and jumping online. What's your game?
Right now, I am playing FIFA 17. I'm pretty obsessed with their story mode, their campaign that they've got. I'm a big sports gamer because I realized I wasn't all that good at actual physical sports. So playing virtual ones, I kick ass. So I'm playing a lot of FIFA 17 and NBA 2K 17. Uncharted 4 I finished a few weeks ago, which was unbelievable. And one of the things I do is I actually play a lot of old PC games. So I've just fired up Age of Empires 3 again, which I haven't played in ages, and I'm having a lot of fun with that too.
Nice, awesome. Yeah, it's something I tend to do around 9:30 at night after my brain is completely fried. The rule in our house is that Missy has to be asleep because it depresses her too much to know that her husband's sitting up playing video games. And if she's asleep, she doesn't realize that I'm playing till like 3 a.m. and so we're all good. Nice. That's awesome. Well, Scott, this has been an unbelievably awesome conversation. Thank you so much for your time today. Where can people go connect with you guys personally on social, and where can they go become a customer of yours?
Sure. So I'd love them to become a customer, and then I'll be their best friend for life. So that's at bowlandbranch.com, BOLL and branch.com. And you can find me on Twitter at Scott Tannen, all one word, or hit me up on LinkedIn or anything like that. But always happy to help answer any questions and network with folks because any success that I've had or will have has been the result of plenty of strangers helping me. So no one should ever feel afraid, especially on Twitter, to reach out. I'm always on it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And this was such a pleasure. Guys, go check them out at bowlandbranch.com, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
Feels